Hi folks, how you doing? Here we are after the sixth game of this World Championship match in Chennai between Magnus Carlsen and Vishy Anand has ended, and yet we have yet another result, another decisive game. Once again, Magnus Carlsen beat Anand. This time Vishy had white pieces. He lost yesterday. Today he had white, and he was supposed to be pushing for a victory today to recover from yesterday's defeat. But once again, he got a worse position in the ending, and Magnus Carlsen, having a slight edge, pushed and pushed and pushed until the world champion cracked. So the Norwegian GM scores his second victory in a row. A very impressive result. So 2-0 in favor of Magnus, and I'm sorry to say for Anand's fan, this could be a difficult non-returning point at this match. It seems very difficult that Anand will be able to win at least 2 games against Magnus Carlsen. But okay, we'll see what happens. Still 6 games to be played. But so far, very impressive results by Carlsen, playing very stubborn endgame and defeating the world champion twice, 2 games in a row. So today Vishy had white pieces. He played once again e4, e5, and we reached the Ruy Lopez again, like in the previous game where Anand had white pieces. Carlsen invites once again to get into this Berlin defense, Berlin endgame, but this time Anand just plays d3, the quiet move, just avoiding the exchanges and playing for a kind of positional, very slow game. Very popular nowadays, just like maybe more than going into this Berlin endgame, where white is having so much trouble in showing some advantage. So some normal move here: bishop c5, c3, just controlling these 2 important squares so that black pieces cannot get into them b4 and d4, and opening this diagonal for the bishop to retreat in case he needs it. Short castle, rook e8, rook e1, very normal moves. a6, just chasing the bishop out of there. b5 and bishop b3, very normal moves. In fact, this line had been played by Anand this year in Alakan Memorial. Anand played this as white against Aronian. Game ended in a draw, I think. So certainly Vishy, the world champion, knew what he was doing. d6, just protecting the central pawn and giving some way to the light square bishop to get developed. Bishop g5, bishop e6, very normal developing moves. Knight bd2. Now here we can see a very typical maneuver of this knight in the Ruy Lopez, where he most probably will go to f1 to later go to either g3 or e3, heading to these light squares here in enemy's camp, very typical of Ruy Lopez structures. h6, bishop h4, and here Magnus decides to exchange finally this bishop. White takes with the a pawn, having this open column to his favor, just keeping an eye on this a6 pawn. Now Magnus decided to retreat his knight, a very logical move, because here on c6 now this knight has not that many squares to go to, so very somehow not that unusual retreat with the knight in the Spanish opening. Now his idea is to put the knight on d7, just defending his colleague in f6, h3, knight bd7. Really not that much was going on in the opening and even in the middle game. So knight g2, probably trying to go to g2 g4 and try to have probably some initiative on the king side, as it sometimes happens in the Ruy Lopez games. Queen e7, x-raying this pawn and having in mind some kind of d5 advance, which in most Ruy Lopez games, if d5 can be played in proper conditions, this already gives at least the equality to black. So knight df1, the knight is going to g3 or either to e3, as we said, to go to these light squares, f5 or e5. Now bishop b6, the c5 square could be useful to advance either the pawn or to put the knight here, and also anticipating a possible b4, just closing this queen side and grabbing some space by white. Knight e3, queen e6, and now b4. Trying to knowing that black will probably try to place either e5 or c5. Playing b4, it just will help white to undouble his pawns, and in fact a5 is played, a couple of exchanges. Now the knight goes to g4. Really nothing much that white can do here. The position is more or less closed and black is standing absolutely okay, no real problem for him. He's not better either, so more or less an equal game. Very similar pawn structure, so some exchange happened later. Now bishop b6, connecting the rooks, putting the bishop on a more useful diagonal. So some exchange here. Queen takes. Now there is a little tiny threat here on f2, as both the bishop and the queen are targeting this pawn. Queen g4, connecting the rooks, probably trying to make something happen on the king side, though it seems very difficult. Now Magnus exchanged these light pieces and goes queen e7. Queen d7 was a possible move for white, just to try to create something here on the back rank, to try to create some weaknesses. Attack, for instance, the pawn on b5, the one on c7. So Magnus just avoids that. Now rook f1, going on to the open file, but anyway, there is nothing really that interesting or that dangerous happening for the player here. Black stands absolutely okay, white has not that much problems. So c5, just advancing pawns, king h2, and c4. Magnus takes this plan just to grab some space and advance some pawns on the queen side. d4, of course, taking on c4 would lead white to have this very weak pawn, as it cannot advance easily, and this white and black could place a rook or either a queen here on this open file, and this would definitely give black an important edge, as this pawn is very weak. Adding to that, this pawn would probably be very weak in the future. So d4, and now Magnus exchanges a pair of rooks and goes queen b7. Now this queen is doing a great job, controlling lots of diagonals and important files here. Lots of plans could rise in the future. So rook d1, taking into account that this file is possibly going to be opened either by taking white or taking black here, so quite important to put the rook on d1. Queen c6, and now queen f5 and e takes. Finally Magnus decides to release the tension in the center, and taking with the rook is compulsory here, otherwise white is simply losing his e4 pawn. Black would be up a pawn without any compensation, I would say, and white would be once again in tough problems. So rook takes d4, and now Magnus takes the initiative, goes with rook e5, queen f3. At this point probably black has already a little edge, because his pawn structure is much better, although he has this weak pawn on d6. White's pawns on b2 and d3 are very weak as well, and which is more important, white has 3 pawn islands, which is not the best pawn structure you want to have. So queen c7, just x-raying the king on h2 for some possible, although not very probable tricks to happen. Something like king h1 was played here, getting out of that x-rays. Some silly moves like h4, and after d5 if white takes, of course this was not going to happen by any means, but black has this trick to play this discovered check. So king h1, queen e7, attacking the pawn on e4, queen g4. So some little maneuvers now by both sides. Black is trying to improve his position little by little, very typical of Magnus' style, playing very slow in this kind of position where he knows he has absolutely probably practically zero chances of losing if he does not blunder. So queen f4, g6, king h2, king g7, trying to improve very slowly his pieces, his pawns. Queen f3, rook e6. Now the idea is probably to come to the f file and take this file into under control. So queen g3, and now white decides to give up that pawn because he would be otherwise he would be condemned to just defend passively. So he decides to give up this pawn to exchange some pawns here on the center and enter in a rook's endgame with the pawn down, having the security more or less that he will be able to hold that. And as we will see, this is going to happen. White takes on d6, and after these exchanges we reach the probably most interesting part of the game, this endgame, where black obviously is a pawn up. He has this 3 against 2 in the king side, but the point is that white is the one who is to move here, and this b5 weakness is going to be attacked first. So rook d5. If it was black to play, probably white is already lost here because rook d2 would be decisive. But white plays first, so rook d5, and black has to defend it. And now rook e6, d6 to prevent this king from coming into the center. f6, an interesting move here. Honestly speaking, I think I've a couple of years ago I thought I learned that this f pawn shouldn't be moved that much in this kind of pawn endgames, pawn and rook endgames, because that gives white rook much more activity on the 7th, more possibilities of checks, etc., going behind the pawns. That's the reason I heard sometimes a master saying that the Dutch defense d4 f5 was not a good defense because all rook endgames were losing for black. But anyways, if the world's highest rated player plays this f6, it can't be bad. So other move suggested here was king f8 to try to go to the center via e7. So here white plays h4, and after king gives f7, h5, sacrificing yet another pawn. Probably not that bad idea, because this would be spoiling black's pawn structure, and having doubled pawns on the h file and on a rook file is not the best way to try to win, as these pawns are usually in a pure pawn endgame. If there are no pieces on pawns other than all the pawns you want on this h file, white king, if he's able to get to the corner, he's not going to have any problems. That's going to be a draw. But anyway, black takes. So Magnus is up 2 pawns here, although his pawn structure is not an ideal one. But okay, a pawn is always a pawn. So now rook d5, attacking that. And now king defends from g6. King g3, getting with the king to the center. Rook b6, rook c5, just a waiting move. f5, trying to advance little by little, improve his position gradually, although at this point white should always have resources, at least at these GM levels, to hold the draw. It is clear that white is playing to draw, and black is the only one who's playing for 2 results here. King h4, preventing black king to coming into g5. Now the rook comes to the e file, sacrifices the pawn on b5, and he wants to be more active. Obviously, having that rook forever on this passive b6 square, black is going to have no chances to win. So he sacrifices that pawn on b5 to get active with the rook. Check. The king has to go down, and king g5. Now rook b8. There are lots of resources here for white to check from behind and try to stop these pawns from advancing. h4, rook g8 check, king h5, obviously going to f4 would drop this pawn, and it is very difficult for black now to win this. But king h8, h5, now rook f8, attacking the pawn, and the rook defends it from f4. Rook c8, putting pressure on this c pawn. White just cannot do anything else that maintain the rook in some active positions and try to hold. Rook g4, rook f8 attacking it once again, and now rook g3 check is possible, intermediate move, king h2, and then he defends with king g5, and after the checks he can go to f4. Rook c8, once again attacking the unprotected pawn. It's not possible to protect it right now, So black just sacrifices it, gives the pawn back to have this king in a much more active position than the white one. Just take a look at the trip he just took, just to be in a very active square, having the possibility to attack white's pawns, to support his own pawns to advance. So white has to take the pawn. Now there is a material equality, but the point is that a white king is very bad placed here, and black has a couple of the dangerous pawn. The main one being this f pawn, which is going to be very fast. A4, rook a4. Not sure if b4, for instance, advancing the pawn right away was better, because we are heading to some similar positions that would have in the current game. But anyway, as I said, these rook endgames are not that easy to understand. At least for me, this is very tough. Lots of subtleties, lots of little tricks, little move orders, which are not that easy to understand, but very important, as we are seeing here, because where in this kind of endgames is where the games between GMs are lost or won. So rook a4 was played here, h3, advancing the pawn, g take h, now rook g6. And c4 is more or less supposed to be the blunder here. Up to this point, white was more or less holding, but this is supposed to be a bad move. Really, we'll have to take a good look at this to understand why is it so bad. The engineers were suggesting something like rook a7 and f3, and probably giving some checks from behind should be more or less enough to draw, but as I said, really not sure about that. But c4 was played here, and after f3, rook a3 check, king e2. The point is probably that this pawn is helping black, because as it's shielding black king from checks from the a file. Now b4, Anand tries to advance the pawn and open some lines to check black king, but f2, the pawn is already on the second rank. Now rook a2 checking f3, rook a3 checking f4. Once again, these pawns are not helping white at all, because he would like to check black king forever. And rook a8, trying to check from behind, but of course black is not going to get a queen now, because a check would get that queen. But a simple move like rook g1, and here Anand resigned. This promotion square is already protected, and there is no way that white can avoid having to sacrifice his rook for the pawn, and then black easily will take all the pawns and win the simple endgame to come. So yet another victory for Magnus, already a 4-2 on the score. Anand is certainly in the ropes, on the verge of losing his crown to the challenger, the young Magnus Carlsen from Norway. And I don't know, but I think this could be a really a very crucial point at the match. Losing 2 games in a row, the second one with white pieces, is very difficult, and very difficult to recover from this kind of situation. But maybe if anybody can do that, if anybody can strike back, is Anand. So we will see. Tomorrow is another rest day, so another 6 games ahead to see what happens. Hoping for some other interesting games. And thanks for watching.